The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We are now going to hear the testimony of TCE 33. Court officer is now instructed to call in these witness. The President. Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. What's your name, please?
My name is Steve Heder. It's actually Stephen Heder with a PH.
The President. Thank you, Mr. Steve Heder. How old are you this year?
60 years old this year.
The President. Thank you. Mr. Steve Heder, what do you do for a living?
I'm a political scientist and a political historian.
The President. Thank you. Mr. Steve Heder, where do you live?
I have right of residence in the United States and in the United Kingdom, and I live in those places and elsewhere.
The President. Thank you. What nationality are you?
I'm an American citizen, U.S. passport.
The President. Thank you. Mr. Steve Heder, could you please tell the chamber your parents' names?
My father's name was Robert Heder, and my mother's maiden name was Patricia Maurer.
The President, what's your spouse name and how many children do you have?
My wife's name is Marianne Lilleberg, and I have 2 daughters.
The President. Mr. Steve Heder, as the witness who will be giving testimony before the trial chamber, the chamber requires that you take the oath based on your religious belief. Do you agree with this?
Yes.
The President. Now the international greffier of the trial chamber will administer the oath-taking ceremony for Mr. Steve Heather. Can we invite the Cafe to please administer this oath-taking, please?
Mr. Heather, could you please repeat after me? I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I solemnly declare I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Speak the truth, tell the truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
The President. Thank you, Mr. Steve Heather. According to the report by the greffier of the trial chamber this morning, according to the best recollection and your knowledge, you are not in a relationship with an accused or a civil party in case file 002, and that you are not related to these indeed two accused persons, Mr. Kilsampon and Nguyen Chie. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
The President. Next, the Chamber would like to notify you of your right under Rule 28, right against self-incrimination of witnesses. Mr. Steve Heather, as the witness, you may object to making any statement that might tend to incriminate you. In other words, you have the right not to incriminate yourself. As the witness, you shall give testimony before the chamber, and that you shall respond to all questions put to you by the judges of the bench and parties to the proceedings, unless you exercise your right not to respond to the questions that are self-incriminating. And as the witness, you shall speak the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and that your responses must be based on the experiences you have encountered. Mr. Steve Heather, have you ever given any interviews to any of the co-investigators of the ECCC over the past years?
No.
The President. Thank you, Mr. Steve Heather. Now the Chamber would like to hand over to the co-prosecutors to begin putting questions to Mr. Steve Heather before the other parties to the proceedings. Co-prosecutors and lead co-lawyers for the civil parties will have 2 days and a half for questioning time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honours, may it please you, good afternoon to the judges of this court. Good afternoon to my fellow counsel, and in particular, good afternoon to you, Dr. Heather. It's good to see you here. Many people in this court have been waiting for some time for you to come, and you're a witness in these proceedings. I want to give you the comfort before we start that you're not an expert witness. I am not going to be asking you to express expert opinions. I am going to be, with, I hope, Mr. President's leave, covering the books that you've authored, covering the interviews you've had with many people over the years, and confining my questions in that way. Now, it has to be selective, because if I was to undertake a detailed examination of everything you've written, we'd be here for 2 weeks. I'd like to start, please, by asking you some biographical questions, or if you can confirm parts that I'm putting to you. Now, is it right that you have a BA in Asian Studies and an MA in Government from Cornell University?
Yes, both of those points are correct.
That certainly at some stage you have been a lecturer in political science at the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies, which for the purposes of my examination I will be shortening to the words SOAS. Is that correct?
Almost. Many British academic institutions don't believe that there is any such thing as political science, which they consider a kind of American conceit. So technically speaking, I was a lecturer not in political science but politics. And in more recent times, I've been a research associate, not a lecturer, at SOAS, which is my current post at SOAS, not lecturer, but research associate.
Is it correct that in the past you have worked as a special correspondent in China, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Taiwan for Time magazine, Newsweek, and NBC News, and that you covered the Cambodian conflict as a journalist between 1973 and 1975?
Yes, all of that's correct. Although it should be said that my sort of extensive journalistic work was only in the 73-75 period.
Is it also correct that at some stage, and please give me the years if it helps, that you served as the Deputy Director of the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, often referred to as UNTAC, in the Information Educational Division?
Yes, that's correct. Although there was some concern within the UN system about the naming of me as a deputy director, which had a specific UN meaning. So I think for part of that time, the title wasn't used, and I instead used the title of the head of the analysis and the assessment unit of the Information Education Division.
Thank you. Is it also correct that you have undertaken research on the Thai-Cambodian border and Phnom Penh from 1979 to 1983 as a Fellow of the Institute of Asian Studies of Chulalongkorn University?
Yes, it's correct in the sense that in that period I did research as a research fellow of the Asian Institute of Chulalongkorn University on the Khmer Rouge while they were in power. That is to say, with regard to the Khmer Rouge in the period that's within the temporal jurisdiction of the court.
And is it also correct that you've undertaken work as a Fellow of the Research School of Pacific Studies of the Australian National University.
Yes, I was in their Department of History. They didn't believe in political science either, so I was a kind of political historian. And again, in that academic capacity, my research was on the Khmer Rouge in the period that's relevant to the temporal jurisdiction of the court.
Is it also correct that at some stage, and tell me if it's still current, that you've been a consultant to the War Crimes Research Office at the American University?
The President, Mr. Header, could you please hold on, and Counsel Kung Som On, you may now proceed. Counsel Kung Som On. Thank you, Mr. President. I have heard that the co-prosecutor were putting some leading questions regarding the witness educational background. We would like just to know the sources of or the basis of these questions. I mean, the resources the co-prosecutor is now relying upon, because Mr. Steve Heather already made it clear that he has never given any interviews to the co-investigating judges, and for that we would like to also have access to those pieces of information. Otherwise, we will take issue with this line of questioning.
I hope my learned friends knows about Google. That's the source of the biography, and it seems Google's pretty accurate. Can I proceed?
The President, yes, indeed, you may.
Mr. Header, is it also right? And again, give me the years, please, because these might not be correct off Google. Sorry. Are there problems with your microphone? Mr. Head, I've got another question, but were you about to add something? Yes.
I'm not sure I answered your question about the specific years of working at UNTAC. That was 92, 93, although there was some preliminary work with UNTAC's predecessor, UNIMIC, which existed in 91.
Thank you. And is it correct that you've also worked, and please give me the years for this, as an investigator, researcher, analyst, or something similar, within the Office of the Co-Prosecutors for this court for a period, and then within the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges?
Yes, that may require some clarification. I was originally contracted by UNAKRT to work as an investigator, researcher, analyst, all one word, in the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges. And that was at a point in time when the staffing pattern for the Office of the Co-Prosecutors included no posts, 0 posts for investigators, researchers, or analysts. So although I was hired by UNAKRT to work for the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges, there was an agreement between Judge Lamond and Prosecutor Petit to lend me temporarily to the office of the co-prosecutors. I was then taken back to the office of the co-investigating judges as a result of a subsequent agreement between Judge Lamond and Robert Petit. So technically speaking, I was always contracted to work for the office of the co-investigating judges, never contracted to work for the office of the co-prosecutors. But I indeed did work in the office of the co-prosecutors from effectively the first day that the court existed through to the end, if I recall correctly, of 2006. I should maybe add here that I had previously worked for UNKRT before the existence of the court in the first several months of 2006 as a consultant to UNAKRT.
Thank you. And can I, there was an objection to my last question a few questions ago. Can you confirm that you've been a consultant to the War Crimes Research Office at the American University?
Yes, I think that was in 98 or 1999. And this may be an opportunity for me to say that that was the period in which I did the writing that led to the publication of 7 candidates for prosecution. And the funding for that research came from the then Open Society Institute. So that's the relevance of that particular period of consultancy or research funding to things that I've authored, which, if I understand correctly, are on the case file.
Thank you. That leads in, I hope, appropriately to the next document. Mr. President, I have prepared a document here which shows all the material authored by Mr. Hedder, which is on the case file and which is on the prosecutor's Rule 80 list. Can I please show a document? Perhaps I would suggest to Judge Cartwright, because I only have an English version, and then can I seek leave to distribute other copies of this document to the court, unless there's another way that you feel is more appropriate?
The President, you may proceed indeed.
I wonder if I might explain the document very briefly to Judge Cartwright and then ask for the President's leave for it to be distributed. It shows, in short, the books written by Mr. Hedder, a selection of statements taken by him when he was working at SOAS, a selection of statements taken by him when he was at DC CAM, and I'll ask a question about that, the interviews he had with Q Sampong, the interviews he had with Ieng Sary, the interviews he had with refugees on the Thai-Cambodian border in 1980, interviews he conducted from the office of the co-investigation judges, and other interviews. My intention, Judge Cartwright, is this should help the judges to understand, to help Mr. Hedder understand, and to help all my learned friends also have a reference document. Can I please ask whether I can have permission to circulate now copies of this document? I'm afraid it's only available in English. I haven't had it translated into Khmer or French.
Judge Silver Card Right, you may proceed, please.
Yes, thank you, President. Just a supplementary question, please, Mr. Prosecutor. This is a list prepared by the Prosecutor's Office, of course. Have you listed these documents on the daily interface? And secondly, are they available in at least 2 and preferably 3 languages?
The first question, yes, they have been downloaded onto the interface. And the second question, there are versions in 2 languages at least, but with some documents only partial translations were done in French and Khmer. So I obviously can't promise you that every page is available in French and Khmer, but with most of them it is. All interviews, for instance, are in all 3 languages. Most of the statements are in all 3 languages. The one that isn't available in all 3 languages is Cambodian Communism, which is one of the books, but generally speaking, available in 2 or 3 languages.
Judge Card Right, please.
Thank you, President. And one further question. Certainly from our own examination of many of the documents attributed to Dr. Heder, we have noted that documents have not been completely translated into Khmer. But our concern is if you, Mr. Prosecutor, intend to refer to parts that are not translated, and if so, whether you have made a request for those to be translated, at least into Khmer.
Judge Kara, can I say I haven't made the request? Can I explain why? I've obviously been preparing for Dr. Heder heavily over the last few days, and the section on particularly Cambodian communism is one that was only settled yesterday or even this morning. Can I suggest this, that certainly both David Chandler and Philip Short testified in circumstances where their books were not available in all languages. And Judge Cartwright, as I have done with, for instance, document presentations where this has arisen, I've put in the requests for the translation immediately after the presentation.
Yes, thank you, President. Well, the Chamber will allow you to proceed on the basis that it may rule against you on occasion, and on the basis that you will seek those translations. But in the meantime, just to make it very clear, I'm not the only one who can read and understand English, so could you perhaps give the entire trial chamber copies of this index? Thank you.
I certainly can, and providing one to you wasn't meant to be an insult to everyone else, but I thought it might help with the management of matters. So I've got, I think, 16 copies here. I wonder if they could be distributed, and also to my learned friends at the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties.
ត្រីរដ្ឋបាលតុលាការទទួលឯកសារពីតំណាងសាធារណៈយកចែកចាយ
The President, court officer is now instructed to obtain the hard copy document from the prosecutor and circulate it to the parties to the proceedings.
Mr. President, can I also ask that Dr. Hedder has a copy, please?
Yes, you may proceed.
Dr. Hedder, I can see that you're familiarising yourself with the document. What I'd like to do is to use this document for verification purposes, first of all. So if we look at the first page, page 1 of the document, we see at item 1A, books and reports by you. It's not exhaustive, as I'd said, but can you confirm that you are the author or co-author of the books itemised at 1 to 5 on that page?
Well, for 5, 4, and 3, I know exactly what they refer to, and 1 as well. 1, I mean, so you haven't given a full academic citation, so it's sometimes a little bit hard for me to recognize these things for what they probably are. And I think 1, 3, 4, and 5 are all published works in the academic sense of the term. I think 2, if I'm not mistaken, is unpublished in the academic sense of the term, and was something that was used as the basis or as a kind of draft that led to the item number 3, which was published in an academic sense. So I think that covers those 5 items.
I'm just going to read them into the record. Number 1, document number E3/3169 is a report by Stephen Hedder entitled Pol Pot and Q Sampon in its shortened form. Document 3 is E3/48. That is a book by Stephen Hedder and Brian Tittermore entitled 7 candidates for prosecution, accountability for the crimes of the Khmer Rouge. Document 4 has a D number of E190.1.398, and that again was a report by Stephen Hedder entitled, quote, Reassessing the Role of Senior Leaders and Local Officials in Democratic Kampuchea Crimes, Cambodian Accountability in Comparative Perspective, close quote. And document or book number 5 on the list is E3/22, which is a book by Stephen Hedder entitled Cambodian Communism and the Vietnamese Model, Imitation and Independence, 1930 to 1975. Dr. Hedder, can we move to the next category? Oh, sorry. I can see you want to add something.
I'm not entirely sure about item 4 because there was a conference paper and then there was a publication, and the conference paper was much longer and more elaborate than the publication. The publication was taken or summarized from the conference paper, and without actually seeing the document itself, I can't be absolutely sure which of the two it is. I think this is the publication version, not the conference paper version, but I would have to see the document in order to be absolutely sure.
That's fair, and I'm about to show you, Mr. President, can I please show Dr. Hedder a copy of the document that is on our case file in order to verify, please, that this is the published work.
The President, you may proceed.
Can I hand, please, to Dr. Hedder, document number on our file, E190.1.398.
The President, Mr. Prosecutor, please hold on. Counsel Coupe, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to make an objection to the terminology used by the prosecutor in respect of this witness. Now, on its face, it might seem a very childish objection that I'm going to make, but I think it's a matter of importance and principle behind it. Mr. Stephen Hedder is here as a witness. He was called upon to appear as an expert. He didn't want to be an expert for whatever reason. That'll be a topic of my questioning. But now he's here as a witness. So I would prefer that my learned friend on the other side addresses Mr. Hedder as Mr. Hedder, Mr. Witness, but not continuously as Dr. Hedder. Like I said, on the face of it, that might be a childish objection, but it isn't. He is here only in one capacity, and that is as a witness. In no court of law is a normal witness addressed with his academic title. So I would invite my learned friend on the other side to address the witness as Mr. Witness or as Mr. Hedder.
I do think it's childish, Mr. President. I once appeared in a court-martial when I was a captain in the British Army, and I was never referred to by my rank, and that was described as wrong. Stephen Hedder is a doctor. That's his academic qualification. If he were a brigadier, we'd call him brigadier. If he had another title, we'd call him that. He, in my respectful submission, is entirely entitled to be described as a doctor because that's what it says on the tin and that's what he is.
The President. It is not a big issue, but since there was an objection, the Chamber wishes to advise the prosecutor to address him as a witness. That will help smoothen the proceedings and the process as a whole. So, Mr. Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Mr. Witness, can you have a look at this document, which is, I'm going to ask the President, I think he's already given permission, E190.1.398. Is this the published version of reassessing the role?
Yes, that's the published version. It's a chapter in an edited volume.
Can I take that back just for the moment? I just wanted you to verify it. Staying on the document index, if we call this document the document index. At item B on page 1, we have a heading of School of African and Oriental Studies, and then listed from item 6 on that list through to item 57 inclusive are a series of statements that suggest that you conducted these statements with these witnesses on the dates concerned. First of all, can I ask you, were you in Cambodia with SOAS or under SOAS in 2005 on these dates?
Yes.
As far as you're able in the brief time you've had to look at these, can you confirm taking these statements?
Well, the dates are familiar, and on a first glance, certainly many of the names are familiar. I frankly don't recognize all of the names immediately, but there's a certain rather peculiar way in which the names are transliterated, which suggests to me that I'm the one who did the transliterating and therefore the interviewing.
Was there anyone else from SOAS conducting this many interviews in 2005?
This may require some explanation of how it is that academic research is done, and particularly how it's funded. This research was all funded with money that came from the then Open Society Institute. I'll add immediately that's not to be confused with the Open Society Justice Initiative, which is a completely different organization. And the way in which this normally works in academic institutions is that a funding organization provides money to your academic employer in order to release you from some of your other academic duties, most notably teaching. And if you are released from teaching, then you are free to go outside of the school, the classroom, and do research in the field. The university normally takes a cut off the top of that funding, but you remain on your university salary. The money doesn't go directly into your pocket. In this instance, there was additional money which was paid to the university, that is to say, SOAS, and which was then paid by the university to other people who worked with me in the conduct of these interviews, who were therefore in effect paid by SOAS. That didn't make them SOAS employees, so I'm not quite sure how to directly answer your question, but that's the way the system worked.
And so, can you remember how long you were in Cambodia in 2005 conducting interviews on behalf of SOAS?
My recollection is that it was a longer period than is reflected here, but I think, well, maybe not. I think what happened was in the earlier part of 2005, there was other research done with the same funding that didn't involve interviewing, but involved looking at documents. So although the overall research grant covered most, if not all, of the calendar year of 2005, the interviewing was done in the latter half of the year, whereas the documentary work was done in the first half of the year. So I think I was in Cambodia for almost the whole of the year, but the interviewing was done in the second half.
Now, did you lead this project, or did somebody else lead it?
I think it would be fair to say I led it, yes.
I'd like to turn now to page 4 of the index, and at the top of page 4 we have DC CAM. The statements here cover quite a broad range, because we move from 1990 with a statement of Uk Bunchun through to September 2005 with a statement of Ruh Soy. Now, can you briefly explain, firstly, what your contact with DC CAM has been during this period?
I find this some of this I think is a bit confused or confusing. The arrangement that I had with DC CAM, which I think was mostly in 2004, was done in a manner similar to the one I just described. There was money which originated with DC CAM and in fact also money which originated with the British Embassy in Phnom Penh, which was, as in the other arrangement, paid to my university to buy out my teaching, to free me up to do to do research work in lieu of doing teaching. And that project consisted primarily of looking at interviews that were done not by me, but by DC Cam, which I then summarized in English and compiled into a series of such summaries. There are a couple of items on here, and some of that tied it over, I think, into early 2005, which would explain some of the dates here. And I think I may have done a few more of these summaries while I was also doing the 2005 work. There are some things here that don't fit with that explanation. There's for example, there's item 65, E3/387, alternative number D210/5. That's not an interview that I did in any association with DC Cam. That's actually an interview I did when I was at the Australian National University, the transcript of which I provided to DC Cam, and it therefore seems to somehow have gone into your system, into the case file, as a DC Cam document. I also am a bit perplexed by item 59, dated 1999. The name doesn't immediately ring a bell with me, and I wonder whether that's possibly the date of DC Cam's interview and not the date on which I did it. And some of these other dates, in fact, are the dates, I think, of the interview as done by DC Cam, not the date on which I summarized it, which would explain why, for example, in the case of item 64, the interview date is given as 2000, but I did the summary in 2005. One might misunderstand from this document that I did the interview or I did the summary in 2000. In fact, that's not the case.
Thank you. When we get to a particular interview, I hope I'll be having Mr. President's leave to show you the interview, and I'm sure we can sort things out there. Moving to the next item, or Mr. President, I see the time is just after 4 o'clock.
The President, thank you. Judge Labian, you may now proceed.
Yes, I believe that the interpreters would like to have Mr. Heder take a bit of distance from the microphone. He's maybe too close to the microphone, so some of what he's saying is being cut off, so it's difficult for the interpreter. So if you can step back a little bit from the microphone, it would make the job easier for the interpreters.
The President. Thank you. And we thank you, Mr. Heder and the co-prosecutor, since it is now appropriate moment already for today's adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn. The next session will be resumed by tomorrow at 9 a.m. And during tomorrow's sessions, the Chamber will continue to hear the testimony of Mr. Steve Heder. Questions continue to be put by the co-prosecutors. Mr. Heder, your testimony has not yet been complete, and that the Chamber will hear you tomorrow as well. So please come again to give the testimony for tomorrow's sessions, the session that commences at 9 a.m. in the morning. Court officer is now directed to assist with the vessel unit to make sure that Mr. Heather is properly assisted during this adjournment and have him return to the courtroom by 9 a.m. Security personnel are now directed to bring Mr. Kyosompon and Noon Chia back to the detention facility and have them return to the courtroom by tomorrow 9 a.m. Mr. Noon Chia is directed to be brought to his holding cell only, where he can help observe the proceedings from there through audio-visual link. The court is adjourned.